Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe, nul ne peut.
Ist dann das vom Moderator weiter.
Okay, ich bleibe jetzt genau.
An den du übergibst. Du kannst aber auch machen, da steht einfach sein Name.
Mache ich dann. Okay, super. Good evening. My name is Lena Ulbricht. I have the pleasure to welcome you here. I'm the academic curator of this event series called Big Data, Big Power Shifts. I'm a researcher at the Berlin Social Science Center, and the organizers of this event, who are the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society and the Vodafone Institute for Society and Communications, are very happy to welcome you here, despite beautiful summer weather outside, despite soccer, coming here, being interested in big data in education. This event is part of a lecture series which comes to an end today. We, under the header of Big Data, Big Power Shifts, we dealt with big data for social science research and media. We dealt with questions of big data in the health sector. We were interested in our last event in the use of big data for the public sector. And in our final event, we want to take a closer look at what big data can do and maybe cannot do in the education sector. This lecture series was accompanied by a special issue of the Internet Policy Review, which is an online journal issued by the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society. And in this special issue, we invited authors to make a contribution about what big data and power look like in different fields of application. And we got submissions from all over the world, and we're happy to accompany and finally publish 4 papers that dealt with big data and power relations in the following sectors: in commercial marketing, in agriculture, in border control and security, and last but not least in the education sector. And our author, Neha Kamel, is here today, and I would like to invite you to read the paper he wrote for our special issue. We have printed a couple of copies that are available at the entrance, and later on in this presentation we will also hear a wrap-up of this paper and also new ideas he's brought here with us. So we're dealing with education today. Coming here and preparing for the event, it just came like a flash to my mind that when I was in primary education, we had a school assignment to write our ideas about what education would look like in the future, which then meant in the year 2022. We're not yet at this moment, but what strikes me is that at that time I thought that education would look like pretty much the same, but with robots. I imagined that we would still go to school or to universities, but instead of teachers, we would deal with robots. And what strikes me is that I thought that it would stay the same and that humans would be replaced by machines. I'm really curious of hearing what Jessica from McGraw-Hill and Neha Kamel will tell us about their look on how education looks like today, and especially with the focus of this event to learn a little bit more about what actors are involved, what data is involved, what is actually big data in education. Maybe we cannot even call it big data. We will hear more about that today. And with not much further ado, I want to hand over to our host this evening, who is also a researcher in the specific field. Richard Heinend, a scholar at the University of Duisburg-Essen. He works at the Learning Labs, who deal with exactly the question how the digitization transforms educational systems. please come to the stage, and thank you very much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to welcome you all to this old and dignified institution, to the fourth and final part of this keynote dialogue, Big Data, Big Power Shift. And today we have the topic from Alma Mater to Algo Mater. And I have to admit that I'm a little bit disappointed that it's only the last part of the series I can attend, because I think it was really interesting. But I think we all agree, at least in this room, that education is the most crucial, the most important, and the most difficult part when it comes to big data. Okay, organized is this series by the Alexander von Humboldt Institute für Gesellschaft und Internet and the Vodafone Institute of Society and Communication, and I have to thank you for organizing this event and give us a possibility to discuss it. Before we start, I would like to give us two aspects that may guide us through the evening, and there are some slides, but I don't know where. Just okay, that's the next one. Okay. I would like to, to give us two aspects, and the first is I brought two people who may turn up in our mind straight away when we're talking about IT in education. First, of course, we have B.F. Skinner and his attempt to create teaching machines, and of course we remind that it wasn't very successful at that time. And what is left over is that we always ask for the capacity of IT for revolutions in education. And the other important point is, I think, when we talk about Skinner, is that he creates the fear of educators and teachers to be replaced by IT. That's the one aspect, but maybe he's not alone, and I brought someone else. I brought John Dewey and his laboratory school in Chicago a little bit earlier than Skinner, and his attempt to research and especially to learning. And he saw teachers more as co-workers and guidance for students, and focused on self-directed learning. And the question is, how can IT assist in this process? So the first aspect that may guide us today is, how do learners, teachers, and IT will interact in future? Will people, by using big data, locked up in closed systems, or will it be a possibility to open up education? The second part, the second aspect I brought to you to guide us to the day is this institution. I just called it old a few minutes ago, but in fact it isn't old. It was just founded in 1992, so it's just 24 years old. But there were some predecessors. That's today, but it all started already in 1700, and it was founded by Kurfürst Friedrich III. As a Kurfürstlich-Brandenburgische Sozietät der Wissenschaften. And only a few years later, it was transformed into the Königlich-Preußische Akademie der Wissenschaften. And this academy was transformed and restructured dramatically in 1806. And then it went through the centuries, and I just make a jump into the year 1946, when it was transformed into the Akademie der Wissenschaften zu Berlin, and later renamed as Akademie der Wissenschaften der DDR. And this institution finally was evaluated and closed after the reunion, and now we have the Berlin-Brandenburgische Akademie der Wissenschaften since 1992. maybe this has not that much to do with big data in education, but it shows us that educational institutes have undertaken many changes, and there were radical cuts in the development, but on the other hand, they remain for a long time in a shape they had before. So it's this two aspects of change and continuity, and the question is, will the shift to big data be a real revolution, or will it be just a change of what will happen? Okay, so that's the second aspect I want to give you for tonight. And now I'm happy to welcome Jessica White in front. And she's an educator and consultant who's passionate about the interface of creativity, technology, and education. She studied in Oxford, and she's an academic consultant at McGraw-Hill Education. And she is founder of an education verein called Think. Maybe we can talk about this. And in German, she was also active in Germany already. She founded an organization or an event series called Teacherology, and she is curating panels for the EdTechX in Europe. Yes, so what I think it's interesting to have, on the one side, somebody coming from a publisher, but also with a broader background in education and technology, and we are happy to have you here, and please.
So thank you for having me here. It's a great honor to talk a little bit about small data in a big data world. I'll be giving you an insight into the learning science behind McGraw-Hill Education. As was said at the beginning, it's not my only role. I also have a foundation, and I'm also curating the Teachology series. However, today I'll be focusing particularly on the learning science behind McGraw-Hill products. So, small data in a big data world. What is McGraw doing? At the moment, we're actually changing. We're changing from a publisher, as mentioned, into a learning science company. And how are we doing that? We're doing that by partnering with educators around the world, as well as learning engineers, content developers, and also pedagogical experts. And we're developing increasingly open learning ecosystems. And this is in order to improve the pass rates, but also to elevate grades, increase engagement for each individual learner, whilst at the same time improving outcomes for everybody. So the vision of us is to unlock the full potential of each learner. And the mission is, of course, to accelerate that learning through intuitive, engaging, efficient, and effective experiences. But these also need to be grounded in research as well as data. So here's a bit of an overview of the company. As you can see, it's quite old, but it's been innovating to become something very different from when it first began. You can see it used to be a publisher's, and now we're heading into the future with looking at technology, and we really have an idea of where we're going, but it's all new to us. At McGraw-Hill Education, the idea is to unlock a brighter future. And the main aim of doing that is to have a deeper understanding of how learning happens. We can only have that deeper understanding of how learning happens by understanding the small data that we're collecting through our products. So educators have always been out there to be at the core of the learning experience. By looking at the data, we do not want to see this as the only way that we can understand how the learning experience happens. The solutions that we develop with the educators impart their knowledge to the students more efficiently. We want to harness the technology that is in the learning space at the moment so that we can enhance learning inside and outside the classroom, and therefore we can deepen the connections between students and teachers. So to begin with, I just want to have a quick look at what really is big data. So ever since the first recorded human civilizations began, we've always looked for ever more sophisticated ways of gathering, collecting, and storing vast amounts of data that we produce. From very early writing systems to the vast storage units of the industrial age, up to our present day time, which is social, sentiment, and often tracked. We have diversified big and small data to suit our needs. But to this day, big and small data remains somewhat elusive. I'm sure there are many people in the audience who are experts on this topic, and whilst I do not claim to be, I hope that I can give you a bit of an insight into how we use that data in the McGraw-Hill learning products. So what does big and small data actually mean in the context of learning and digital education today? Big data can be seen as a blanket phrase that raises issues of security, accessibility, but also how to sort, compress, and to understand these masses of data, of unrelated information. It can also be understood as a collection of data sets that are so large and complex that it becomes difficult to process, using on-hand database management tools or traditional data processing applications. Today, it is about collecting as much relevant data from as many sources as possible and analyzing them in real time, and making an optimal decision based on current circumstances. However, we have to be aware that the decisions that are made through this analysis is never 100% accurate. There is always an element of human error, of human judgment. And that is where the educators come in with McGraw-Hill. When analyzing vast data sets, then big data can be defined through the three V's: volume, variety, and velocity. This was identified in 2001. I don't want to go into the details of this because it's beyond the scope of the presentation. However, I encourage you to look more into this analysis. So what about small data? How is small data different from that of big data? Small data is usually defined by the fact that it's not big data. Information is collected for a specific purpose. As you can see here, this is an idea about how the universe was then changed from what it originally was thought of. Originally, it was thought of something, this is from Galileo, and what we can do with big data is we can actually analyze and understand the universe better. In the same way, we can understand different aspects of our lives through the analysis of big data and small data. So I would like to strike the analogy between the development of the microscope and the way in which we analyze small data and big data. So small data has low volumes, batch velocities, structured varieties, and big data is into petabyte volumes, real-time velocities, and multi-structured varieties. As you can see here, then the analysis sticks to the volumes, velocities, and varieties. The use of small data instead of big data was a deliberate one with McGraw-Hill. We wanted to be a world in which we could differentiate the learners and how they learned differently. Currently, data science is active within education to the point where we can take, for example, here, we can take small data as being very different from what big data offers. We're able to explore the observations do not follow the expected patterns or assumptions. By analyzing big and small data, we can go to further frontiers. So for example, small data can be defined by and collected for a specific purpose. By gathering data about the specific learning outcomes, it is possible to enable rich findings as we analyze the volume of that specific learning data and the variety and the velocity. So you can see here that small data is the strategic use of learning data with a direct correlation to performance. It is the assignment scores, the time on the task, and the progress in an adaptive learning environment. Data and analysis is in the hands of the learner and the instructor. The way in which that data is collected enables the system to help both the instructor so that they can support the learning objectives, but then also to understand how the students are struggling and where they can support them within class, whether that be through reading or more material or asking more questions. So the small data acts as a foundation to support both the instructors and learners, and not a be-all and end-all. We don't want to get rid of the teachers. Small data can begin with adaptive learning and end with analytics, as you see here, and insights. But of course, that is only part of the story. The other part is how the teachers and students can interact with the knowledge of that data, but then in a more meaningful way. Some of you are probably aware of the increase of blended learning environments and the flipped classroom approach. Here you can see there is a learner who can go through the knowledge space in a particular way, always reaching the end goal, but coming at it from different angles. So the flipped classroom gives the learner and the teacher the ability to use that data in a way which foundational lectures are done at home. This is then doubled up with gamification activities, foundational exercises, and builds upon their conceptual knowledge that allows the students to become more engaged with that content and realizing some of their pain points or where their challenges are. As the students interact with their coursework, the instructor system collects formative data on student performance and engagement through peer grading, mastery-based assignments, as well as ungraded formative assessments. This velocity, variety, and volume of the data helps the lecturers in turn understand where they can support their learners and continually throughout the course. This is where more engaged learning can happen. It is efficient and is also increasing the student and teacher interaction, not decreasing. There is the collaborative learning that goes with that, and there is also time for assessment as well as activity. With learning analytics, we are able to understand better when the students are able to move on to the next topic, but also when the students may be at risk and may not be able to complete the course. And therefore, we can understand so we can intervene and help them further. So these are the different kinds of ways in which small data can help the learning experience rather than being a standalone product. Here is a little bit more about the product itself. SmartBook, as you can see here, is not only based on how the student answers the questions, but also the metacognition. And those factors go into the system, and then, for example, here, this is a Learn Smart title. And those are the chapters that they can follow. As you can see, they don't have to follow them in a linear order. And the chapters contain the learning objectives. Those learning objectives then take the students through to the goal because they contain probes. And in those probes, there's usually 2 to 5 per probe, which the student is able to answer through the learning objectives and then move on to the next. There are about 5,000 probes per title. And this is how small data has been able to help both the teachers and the students to continue learning in the most effective way. So the learning objectives are prioritized, first with the core, and then it builds on the core, and then it's conceptual. So as you can see, it gradually helps the learner progressively gain confidence through their understanding of the topic. The learning objectives are, of course, related to each other, and the probes are related. And of course, there are different types of probes. So the probes contain different questions, such as true or false, or multiple choice, or multiple statements, ranking, but also filling in the blank. Now, you may find this quite basic, but as I said, it's building on the core and the conceptual, so that when the students go into the class, then the teacher is more able to effectively learn with those students where they're finding challenges. Again, it's not a standalone product. Each probe has a certain difficulty and predictive value of where that student will go, which enables them to be taken through the knowledge space effectively. There is also the context of the probe within the subject, as well as the question type, which I mentioned previously, the true-false, or the multiple choice, or the multiple statement. Obviously, this true-false is easier than the other fill-in-the-blank, and so it gets more challenging as the student continues. This is also based on the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and as you can see here, then the student is encouraged to study more at the beginning and less at the end. That way, they can retain the knowledge longer in their long-term memory. So what's inside the system? We talked a little bit about how small data is harnessed in the service of the learner, and how it can be properly constructed within the administrative data of the system. We are able to catalog through metadata, ensuring that that data can be found in the most effective way, so that the dynamic of the learning can take place. I would like to argue, and perhaps we could go into this in the discussion, that the possibilities of small data are quite vast. It increases a personalized learning space, as well as student engagement. That data-driven decision-making allows for better outcomes, grades, retention, but also completion of the course, which is often a challenge for the students and for the teachers. Not only that, it brings remediation time so that they can not feel like they're cramming, and also spend time understanding where their challenge or their pain points are. And hopefully, in the end, it gives a bit more faculty satisfaction. So there are different components, as mentioned, the metacognitive theory, but also that of deliberate practice, not just cramming at the end and trying to reach some kind of targeted exam and then not remembering anything. There is the theory, so we programmed a lot of gamification exercises, hopefully making it a bit more fun, and then bringing back richer content based on what those learning needs are. And then, of course, it's the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. So we advise the student how they can study. But of course, the students can study however they like. We're only just a guide, and we're not anything more. So this continual feedback enables the students to have not only their own study practices with their friends, with their teachers, but also a personalized tutor that guides them through the process, shows them where they may be forgetting, or where they maybe need to read more, or watch more, or discuss with the tutor or their peers more. Small data in a big data world is able to look at where the students, the faculty, and the institution can increase the learning spaces. The configuration is always in the hands of the students and the teachers. The teachers have a lot of control about the kinds of assignment they're setting and how those assignments are being set. It's never about testing, it's always about assessment, and then understanding how that assessment takes the learner further. And the data is always belonging to the students, the faculty, and the institution. The data is used by McGraw-Hill in order to inform the product, in order to inform the instructors and the students how they can learn better. But it is, in the end, owned by the students and the faculty and the institution. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. When we first met a few minutes ago, you told me, well, I have to do the evil part today. I think it wasn't the evil part. I think it was a really challenging part. And now we go to the other side, and I'm happy to welcome Neha Kamel. He is a legal scholar and PhD student at the Haifa Center for Law and Technology. He investigates interaction between law, education, and technology in the digital age from legal and pedagogic perspective. And I think it's really interesting to have these different perspectives in his view. And he is also a former high school teacher at the Teach for Israel program. And the aim of this program was to, or is to overcome system-based inequality in education. And that's something I think the Israel system and the German system has really in common. And it would be interesting to discuss the issue of the legal issue and the social justice issue of big data in education. So, Neha Kamel.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you for inviting me here to make sense of big data. This is a beautiful venue. And unfortunately, after Jessica's fascinating talk, I'm going to be tonight's party pooper. And I guess this is what we lawyers do. Now, I'll be talking about the regulatory challenges in protecting students' rights while applying big data technologies. So, am I doing right? No. Just use this one. Okay. Now, educators have always used data to inform instruction and to improve the learning process. So before talking about regulation, I would like to start with breaking down what are the key implications of big data education. How does it work? So first of all, significantly quantity of student data is being processed throughout the educational process. Now, teachers and students' interaction with a wide range of digital application generates a vast amount of data. The available data can provide us information about students' demographics, his psychological condition, his financial status, his attendance records, grades, of course, but it can also provide us information about how students learn, what are his weaknesses, his preferences, his motivations, what does he know, what he doesn't know. And now for our discussion, please allow me to refer to all of these types of data as student data. Let's call it like that. So student data can be personally identifiable information. It can also come in a de-identifying form, and it can also be in an aggregated manner. Student data can be extracted from various different kinds of data sources. This may be longitudinal databases, standardized tests, learning management systems and apps, and so on. Let's look, for example, at this application. It's called Class Dojo. This popular cartoonic behavior app lets a teacher award point or subtract point based on a student's conduct in classroom. Now, the app immediately sends a notice to the child's parents if he had signed up for the service. So now, I'll just show you what it can do. Well, these are the options that you can press as a teacher. Now, apart from being quite annoying from a parent's point of view, this application collects a lot of sensitive data about children, about students. And currently, schools are generally incapable of independently processed and used the vast amount of available data. Therefore, they've come under an increased pressure to turn to the private sector for the provision of big data techniques. Educational technology companies such as Pearson and such as McGraw-Hill now possess the capacity to collect, to mine, to process, to analyze, and even make educational decisions based on significant amount of student data. And the third implication is that student data is being processed by algorithm-based softwares. Ostensibly, these softwares can afford technology-enhanced pedagogical application, such as personalized learning, adaptive learning, and performance prediction. Newton, for example, it uses sophisticated algorithms to provide students with learning activity recommendation based on what the students know, what he doesn't know, what he's struggling with, and what he's ready for. Now, to sum up this point, we see that as a result of the introduction of big data into education, larger portions of schools' core functions, such as teaching, assessing, disciplining, are being outsourced to for-profit organizations. Now, this kind of transition, it brings about a shift in power, and I didn't randomly select these colors, and it brings a shift in power from schools, who were traditionally entrusted with the capacity to educate, to the hands of for-profit organizations. And I can presume that as education becomes more web-based and more data-driven, we can expect the role of vendors in schools' everyday operation to expand. Now, using technologies or services offered by vendors is certainly not new to the educational domain. Nonetheless, the combination between more technology and the reliance on vendors, on for-profit organizations, has nourished wide-ranging concerns in the US regarding the use of student data. Let us go back to 2011. In Bloom, it's a non-profit corporation funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and along with the Carnegie Corporation of New York, it offered school districts an advanced data repository that can collect information from districts' many databases. The information could be stored in the cloud, and schools would have easy access to it. InBloom also promised to help with personalized learning by funneling student data into a software dashboard. By 2013, every school in the state of New York was using InBloom's data repository, sharing personal information of 2.7 million students. Now, at one point, by the way, InBloom admitted that it could collect more student data than Google does. And that's a lot. But for some worried parents, InBloom's access to so much data and information about students became just too fearsome. So, following an intensive negative campaign led by parents and privacy advocates, in April 2014, InBloom completely shut down its operation. This is after an investment of over $100 million. And just to clarify, there was no evidence of InBloom misusing in any manner the information that it collected. And in response to Americans' persistent concerns over the use of student data, state legislature began passing laws to fill the gap in the outdated federal laws that addressed the use of student data. In fact, by October 2015, 47 US states introduced 186 bills that addressed the use of student data. Of these bills, 28 in 15 states were enacted into law. There are also several federal laws that are currently pending. So the question is, what is it exactly that overnight made Americans so suspicious of this private sector's access to student data? And another question is, why should Europeans be interested in the American student data uproar, as I call it? So now, the prime concerns were mainly and obviously about privacy. Critics were afraid of the disclosure of sensitive information about children, such as learning disabilities, disciplinary problems, family trauma. Of particular concern was the likelihood that vendors will sell or otherwise monetize student data through building advertising profiles or marketing. This concern turned out to be well placed. In 2014, for example, Google admitted that it was mining student data from its Google Apps for Education, which are offered free to schools for the purposes of targeting advertisements. But the demise of InBloom triggered an extremely polarized debate over the surrounding student privacy. What is student privacy? Nevertheless, with time, this debate went way beyond privacy in the sense of appropriate flow of information. Indeed, much of the debate about student privacy was not about privacy at all. And the term student privacy just became a rallying cry related to any issue that involves the use of student data in K-12 education. Critics have expressed their concerns that the use of student data by third party will result in a threat to students' autonomy. They claim that constant monitoring of students' online activity may overly limit their creativity and their free speech by creating the so-called surveillance effect. And when thinking of these claims from an educational perspective, we can argue that constant data collection can harm the development of students' intellectual autonomy, as Jean Piaget would describe it, and eventually it will hinder the educational process. And if we wish to translate Piaget's theory into legal terms, I believe that we can use Neil Richard's legal concept of what is called intellectual privacy. This is a different way to look at privacy. So intellectual privacy means, and I quote, the ability, gap, to develop ideas and beliefs away from the unwanted gaze or interference of others, constantly monitoring students' action, reading and communication may just as well breach their intellectual privacy as Richard defines it. Now, this is a different way of looking at the potential risk of big data to student privacy. Big data in education has also been perceived as a threat to educational equity and opportunity. A White House report from 2014 titled Big Data Seizing Opportunities, Preserving Values raised the possibility of big data leading to potential discriminatory outcomes for disadvantaged groups. Let's see how it works. Let's look at, for example, at the services offered by the National Research Center for Colleges and Universities Admission. Now, this center, it's a private company, by the way, it offers a model to predict which high school students are most likely to enroll to a certain college. Now, this wonderful ability to identify prospective students helped many colleges to target students that might never have thought about enrolling or going to college. But at the same time, the same ability raises the risk that some colleges with worrisome bottom lines will pursue only certain kinds of students. For example, students that can pay their way without scholarship on the expense of others who Even more so, critics have been concerned that continuous student data mining coupled with data-driven decision-making will exacerbate biases and create new forms of discrimination. Now, grounding decision-making on objective information retrieved by algorithms may appear neutral and irrefutably objective and scientific, of course. But however, the assumptions that are built into the technology, they reflect particular norms and particular values about what educational equity means. Therefore, the algorithm itself may rely on biased data that reflects social inequalities, and therefore it may reinforce present structural inequalities. Another equity-related problem with grounding decision-making on big data and algorithms lies in the fact that correlation is not causation. Therefore, the algorithm may find a high correlation between, let's say, attendance and end of the year scores. And it makes sense, of course. But from a normative point of view, will we feel comfortable making, let's say, an ability grouping decision based on this correlation, knowing that children from underserved communities are relatively much more likely to be absent? One more prominent concern has to do with big data prematurely and permanently labeling students as underperformers. For instance, the identification of students as at-risk students might not allow them to remove any harmful information or harmful record about their failures. And so, even if a student significantly improved in the future, how do we know that prior data will not forestall future opportunities? So after this long overview, we can now talk about regulation. So the American case elucidates that the protection of students' rights shouldn't focus only on the uses of data outside of school, but inside it as well, taking into account the various potential risks. Now, please be reminded that edtech companies are not bounded by constitutional law and are not publicly accountable like elected officers are. And this makes the process much more complicated. On the other hand, increased regulation may limit the ability to develop important educational solutions and important services and products. It may also make vendors worry to invest and to use big data in schools. So a narrow focus on risks and on safety may just as well undermine students' ability to access the wonderful benefits of big data. Therefore, we need a regulatory approach that can foster students' rights while maximizing access to innovative services. And to some extent, this needs to balance, the need to balance between data protection and data-driven innovation. It exists in many other fields, such as health, insurance, banking, transportation, governance, border control, e-commerce, etc. But all the same, K-12 education does have some distinguishing characters or distinguishing characteristics that cannot be ignored when designing legal and regulatory rules. This is, of course, just a partial list of those unique characters that K-12 education has. And another challenge to regulating big data in education lies in the fact that often the law is not enough. We know that human rights are a legal concept and we are used to thinking of them in legal terms, but if we care about student rights, we must protect them beyond the legal system as part of the culture and the norms of contemporary data-infused educational landscape, including pedagogical norms, technological designs, and professional ethics. Some of these regulatory questions are actually questions of educational policy. When and where and for which purposes do we need big data? What are the boundaries between private and public in data-driven education? Who calls the shots? It is the algorithm? Is it the teacher? Now, educational achievements are already being assessed based on measurable data. Do we want more of this kind of assessment? These are all questions that should be answered by educators, not by lawyers. Now, as opposed to the American piecemeal approach of regulating the use of personal data, where legislation is sector-based, the European Union applies a comprehensive legal approach. Now, these challenges that I've described of regulating big data in education should make us examine whether the principle of the recently enacted General Data Protection Regulation are appropriate and effective in this regard. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to elaborate on each and every principle. So please allow me to discuss one major principle just to illustrate this kind of analysis. Informed consent. Informed consent is a key ground for lawfulness of processing personal data. Now, before big data, parents could roughly gauge the expected uses of their children's personal data. But today, the ability to make extensive secondary uses, often unexpected uses, of student data makes it just simply too complicated for the average parent to make fine-grained decisions or choices for every new situation. Therefore, parents could end up unintentionally exclude their children from services that are necessary for their education just because they're unable or unwilling, to parse out complex data policy statements. Now, this is perhaps one of the reasons why protecting students' rights should be a regulatory and not a contractual matter. However, opting out is also hardly a feasible alternative in the educational context. Most parents do not have the privilege of changing their children's school just based on their privacy policy. And since schools ultimately have the power to make choices and decisions that can affect a child's life chances and life course, there is a risk that parents will feel compelled to accept the terms of use. This is only one of the principles that I talked about, but each one can be discussed in this regard. But student privacy doesn't have to be a binary concept, which is either or, on or off. Parents should be given the option of choosing which data they agree to share and for which purposes. I believe that if EdTech companies claim that they can personalize learning, no doubt that they can also personalize privacy policy or data use policy. Now, it could be that big data will revolutionize education as we know it, and maybe a shift in power from schools to vendors is inevitable to some degree. But it would be a mistake to run forward on computing and statistics without making sure that students' rights are not jeopardized and are not compromised in pursuit of conflicting governmental and contractual interests. And the General Data Protection Regulation, the European, indicates a possible paradigm shift in approaching privacy and data protection, but still it does not address the entire pitfalls of big data in education. So I would suggest to start with identifying and evaluating the potential risk. What are the potential risks? And just then to carefully design the appropriate regulation that will safeguard students' rights without creating any roadblocks for innovations. I'm on time, huh? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Yoni, and I would like to invite you both in front.
Thank you.
Okay, we have around about 30 minutes for a discussion, but we don't want to do it just the three in front, but I would like to invite all of you to ask questions and give comments. But first of all, I would like to invite Jessica to briefly react on Yoni's talk.
Yeah, just open some water. First of all, I think your talk was fantastic because this is something that was really, has been on my mind a lot. Obviously having been a teacher before and also having taught big data in Kufstein. So primarily on the topic of ethics. And I think what's really interesting is that with your talk is that the importance to shed light on these issues because we're at a point where we have this amazing technology, but it's always important to see how that relates to the kinds of laws that are operating in different contexts. At the moment, obviously, there are a lot of American edtech companies that are operating in the European space, and there are different laws and regulations in place. With McGraw-Hill, then there is a Data Governance Council that was set up in order to address these kinds of issues because it's so complex. And I was actually just introduced to this recently, and I think that your point that you were saying, which was we should be aware of these issues so that we do not hinder innovation. However, it's important to not go forward blindly. Yeah, and I completely agree with this because in terms of informing not only the teachers but also the students themselves, where that data is going, how it's used, and also if it's shared. You know, in terms of McGraw-Hill, it's not shared with a third party, and the main aim is to improve the learning outcomes of the students and the teachers. But I'm absolutely with you that there should be this cautious nature around what's being developed in terms of innovation, and it shouldn't just be, yes, innovation is the way forward, blind, you know. So that's my reaction on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have, in a way, the same question to both of you. You both were talking about the possibility of teachers to have more freedom, to have more possibilities to create learning activities and learning environments. And in a way, I had the feeling that both data protection regulations, but also data-driven decisions can attack this freedom of teachers. For example, you mentioned the flipped classroom, and then you told us how students can work with your system and that they get a tutor within the system. And the more you was talking, the more the teacher disappeared. So it looks like I have the learning, the digital learning environment at home, and I can do everything at home, and then I go to school and have a teacher for what reason anymore? So that's the one question. And on the other hand, when you're talking and say, well, we have we need data protection regulations. If you have more and more regulations, then you have to ask teachers and students all the time to agree to something. Does this will lock teachers in at the same time? So maybe you can start.
Yeah, sure. Great question, and very important. The role of teacher is fundamental to the learning process, and the importance that I showed of the learning, digital learning product, I think that I wanted to really show the kind of opaque, perhaps make it a bit more transparent about the learning science behind the products. So that's why I was very focused so much on the product. But in terms of how it's used, that's something that actually is really being worked on at the moment in terms of consultancy, because the products, I mean, I'm sure some of you have probably had learning products at home when you were growing up at school, or perhaps you used it at university or beyond university with MOOCs and so on. And it's only one aspect of it, you know. I think the way in which we are teaching and learning is undergoing huge reform at the moment, and it's about what role does that technology play? You know, that's the kind of questions that you were raising. Is it central to the learning experience, or is it just an add-on? If it's just an add-on, then is it really necessary? And probably not. So how can we create those kinds of blending learning environments where we do use the tools that are out there in terms of the innovation, but the central importance is always the teacher and the student? And how is that technology informing the learning process so that the student and the teacher can then create better, more interactive learning environments? I mean, for example, when I was at some schools, then a lot of, the teachers were saying, particularly with girls, they're struggling with mathematics, not because of their way of learning, but because of their confidence. And if, for example, that's one of the things about the adaptive learning, is that it helps you with the metacognition. So it says, okay, if you are not confident, please let us know. You let the system know, and then it brings you back more content of the same thing. And so the girls in this particular circumstance were able to practice a bit more and therefore gain confidence so that when they got into the classroom, then they were like, I know this.
Okay.
So it's about how can we use that technology for the learning environments, not here's the technology, let's forget about a teacher.
Okay.
That's a little bit,
Thank you.
yeah.
And the other side of the medal, how can, or is there a risk that regulations can narrow the freedom of teachers?
If we look at those legislation efforts in America and the US to address the risk of student data, we said that one of the solutions would just to provide more opportunities for notice and for consent to parents. Now, as you were saying earlier before, this may block a little bit the educational process because I would need the consent of each parent to every step of the way. Okay, it can slow the process, of course, and it can be quite a burden for the teacher to hand out papers all the time to sign for. But it can be done in a different way. It doesn't have to be that particular to every new situation to get a consent. It can be that. First of all, as I was saying, it can be a personalized privacy policy. So a parent can choose whatever he wants to do with the data. Okay, does he agree to share it, and which kind of data? And it can also be at the beginning of the year. It doesn't have to be all the time. So we need to find this kind of balance between this need to get a really informed consent, okay, that really understand in a transparent way what are the possible uses of the data that we are sharing, but on the other hand, we don't want to hinder and to damage the process by telling the teacher to hand out all the time papers and agreements all the time. Okay, it will make education law eventually. So
yeah.
No, I was just, what came to my mind was when, during the courses that I ran with my charity, then we had this on a very kind of low-tech level of the media release forms. And this was really important to hand over to the students, the media release forms. Do you want your children to be photographed or filmed? Because often the film was used as a way of learning, right? And some of them didn't, which is totally fine. And then I was talking with the people who filmed, and I said, right, you have to be careful because they don't want to be filmed. And it didn't hinder any kind of learning process, which was...
Yeah, but this is when you were filmed for one time, 2 times, 3 times a year, okay? We are talking about an ongoing filming that is happening all the time. Because when you collect data, you're actually filming the students all the time. So it's not like to request consent for 2 times, 3 times a year. This is the educational process itself. Okay, it's like you are teaching through the camera. So this is a different kind.
I would like to ask this question in a slightly different way again. I totally agree when you say we need consent between educational institutions, the providers of the systems, and
that can be communicated a bit more, but I think that in terms of when edtech companies are working with the students, with the teachers, then that needs to be at the outset laid out that this is only information and that you yourselves need to create that dialogue with the students to understand why is that happening. And maybe they might have more information themselves. So it's an information tool.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of, you mentioned how much control do they have. So yeah, again, this is a very new way of working, and it's come about from the kinds of environments like in Germany, and it's based on the idea of instructional design, which is quite popular in the States. It's also, research is being done here, for example, at the LMU, and that instructional design is at the forefront of the development of the product. And that instructional design is done with the institution, whether it be the school, with the students, and with the teachers. And I'm very excited about this because it's more dialogical. And then the data is communicated a bit more with the teachers and the students.
Well, just to hand this question also to you, the question of the human error. Can you deal with is it at least possible to deal with regulations with this human aspect of making errors?
First of all, it's a bit funny that humans make error, but algorithms do not make error.
Okay.
So, now, I think that the human error in prediction, for example, okay, to prediction, yeah. So, I'm not sure that if a teacher receives a visualization or a report about the students, does he have any discretion at all to decide?
Oh, absolutely.
And it does,
Yeah.
yes, but does it really have discretion? Because if you target an exam and identify a student as at risk, okay, so I would say, okay, this is what the computer says, okay, it decided that this student is at risk, so it might as well be at risk, it is at risk. And this can make teachers, it can make them not activate their discretion just because of the report, just because the algorithm said something. Okay, so I'm saying, okay, this is something that the algorithm says, it has nothing to do with it anymore.
Okay.
So this also shifts the educator's role. Okay, what am I? I'm only the speaker of the algorithm. I'm also only the speaker of the for the report.
Yeah. It's a huge danger, and I think that's something that is, it's like the ethics of algorithm, right? And I'm fully for developing, when you're developing the instructional design with the teachers and the students, bringing ethics into play, and saying, okay, what do these kinds of analytics mean? What do they tell you? They only tell you part of the story. They don't tell you the full story. And so if you take them as being full story, then it's bound to go in a different direction than if you take a holistic approach. And that's why I think it's so important for this dialogue between the product development and the students and the teachers, rather than it just being, okay, here's the technology, that'll solve your problem.
Yeah, but when the product is already ready, okay, and out on the market, other teachers will use it, okay?
Yeah.
And then, is this software a recommendation or is it a decision? I wouldn't know because I wasn't part of the process. Because I do receive, eventually, you cannot custom-made a product to each teacher or each student. So it will be replicated.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think that's it's really interesting question how to enable teachers to continue this dialogue you're doing with teachers by while you are developing the tools to the classroom when teachers not in direct contact with you. And I think it's a question how to support teachers to use those products, and it's not just a technical question, so to teach them how to use technology, but it's more a question to teach them or to support them to use the information and to use them to create a dialogue. So it's an issue of personal development of teachers as well. So it's not just to bring it to schools and sell it, but also to develop teachers to use it properly.
I mean, it's a little bit like social media, like, the social media, the technology is there, and then, I was teaching young girls about how to use social media, not, okay, you must do it like this and you must do it like that, but just to be aware that there are tools there and you can use them in a way that perhaps might damage their peers, themselves, put themselves at risk, or they can be aware of the risks and be more informed to make their own decisions. And with the analytics, then you have the information there. They can be used as a standalone and, oh, this person is at risk and therefore we're not going to let them into this school. Or it can be used to identify, okay, this person looks like they're struggling on a particular learning objective. What are the reasons for that? Is it because I made, like the teacher made, the learning objective too difficult, because you can actually decide on the learning objectives through the system? So do I need to put the level lower, or is it something to do with the way that the student is learning? And let's have a dialogue about this. So I agree, there is an absolute risk, and it's about how that technology is used. I think technology itself is neutral,
Yeah. In a way, we come back to your question of consent. So it's not only a question to have a consent at the beginning to use data in a this or that way, but it's also to continue the discussion about this consent, how to interpret data all the time, and again and again, and between students and teachers and maybe parents. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Yes. Over there, yeah, with the glasses and the.
Okay. I'm Isabella Herrmann. I'm working for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And I have a question going also in the direction of consent. Because just imagine there was a company, like a third party, like, what was the name, InBloom? And this company would be accepted, right? So there would be this problem, actually, that maybe using algorithms, students are in danger of being so if they failed once, they have no possibility to develop anymore, right? This is what you kind of said, or that you're kind of in this direction, and then you have no possibility to improve yourself again, because then you are in this, you are labeled kind of because you failed. So, but there might be another problem, because actually if there was some consent needed, and then some people say, okay, I don't want this, I don't want my data to be collected. And you have two parts. So one part of the students consent to the system and the others not. So would you say there is also risk for their future life? Because actually you could sell this data to companies, and then you're kind of suspicious, right? Because why didn't this person consent? So what does this person have to hide? And the others, are kind of, everyone can see what you achieved or what you succeeded in, and then you might be interesting for other companies. So would you say this is another risk, that you're excluded or marginalized in the whole career working space progress?
Thank you. We have another question. Maybe we just collect a little bit, and then we have a last answer round. Okay.
Okay. Hello, my name is Eike Gref, and I have been a student myself not too long time ago. And I will try to have a rather brief question, because that was a rather complex one. I would be very curious to know about the reasons when schools refuse to work with you. I imagine you are approaching institutions. What are the reasons they are giving you for not wanting to work with you? And the second one is, in your presentation you were kicking off with small data as allegedly your method, and I would like to know if you were ready to settle for big enough data. And if you would be ready to settle for big enough data as the basis for your tool, because otherwise I would be very surprised about the element in your presentation where you were talking about data-driven decision-making. And I would like to hear just more on how you would talk about small data and this, of course, very focused data you presented, and which decisions later on are based on that data, and if those decisions are only applied to adapting your tool, improving your tool, or also which kind of tasks or encouragements are fed back to the students. Okay, so the two questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe we start with a short one with you, and then we go over to the second.
Okay. So in terms of your first question to do with schools, what are the reasons for refusing to work with us? In my experience, then the reason... Sorry? In my experience, then the reasons have been regarding content. So at the moment, then the content Yeah, unfortunately, it's not really to do with data, but that's just my experience. It's more about the lack of adaptive content for schools, because most of the adaptive content is being developed for higher education, and also because a lot of the rights of the content are being held in the US, and so there is an issue about we need to develop more content for K-12. Yep. That's been the major refusal in my experience. I'm sure that my colleagues has probably experienced something else. Yeah, I can only speak from experience, unfortunately. In terms of the small data, and I think I understood the question. Is it something about which decisions are then bringing back what kind of content in that small data? Is that right? Or is it something more?
That was part of my question.
Yeah. Yep. Just wondering if
so
you could just clarify.
I admit that I could have done better at being clear with this question.
Yeah.
So if you want to stick to the point that you are using small data as the basis for developing your tool,
yeah.
I would like to know if the element of data-driven decision-making that you had on your slides refers to using this small data that is collected from the students to improve the tool in the future, or also to come to decisions about the students' parcours. For example, are they evaluated as being rather weak or rather strong on the basis of that small data, which I imagine are then their level of confidence they indicate, or their relation of correct answers as compared to incorrect answers, because that, in my opinion, still is creating a profile. And then we have, in my understanding, an activity of profiling, which is very much linked to big data and big data analytics, and which of course has the risk of German angst coming back to you. And so I might as well ask, does relabeling your tool as small data work for you in Germany as a way to make people less afraid of you?
Oh, I see. Okay, now I get it. All right, thank you for clarifying.
So that was the background to my question, but I'm still curious about the core of the question.
Sure.
Is it only used to improve your tool, or does it affect the students and the evaluation?
Okay, great. Now I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, in terms of the small data, then the way in which the decisions are made, then, and the kind of content it brings back. Of course, it brings back the content that is in the, so for example, we originally were a publishing company, changed to a learning science company, which means that the content that is being fed back is based, for example, with SmartBook, then the content is based on the particular book, you know, the content of the book. And so, for example, if a student is struggling with a particular learning objective, then the content that is fed back is what is in the digital book, so to speak, right? And it's not about, okay, the student is weak because they do not answer the question correctly, or that their metacognition, their confidence level is low. It's not saying, okay, this student is weak. It's saying, how can we improve, or how can we give the student more opportunity to understand the concept or the learning objective that is in that material? And the way that is done is that, I mean, I showed you a little bit like the knowledge space. So you enter from different aspects. And so, you know, one student may find that the learning objective, this learning objective, is better to enter from this type of material. And the algorithm feeds back the content that suits that particular knowledge of the diagnostic knowledge of that student. But it's never saying, you are weak, you know. It's not profiling that student as, you know, at risk, so to speak. I know that's being used in the US quite a lot, but that's not really the aim of the program. It's more to actually give the student the better chance to learn differently. I mean, you know, learning mathematics at school, I did it completely different from everybody else. And without the adaptive learning program, then I was seen as a weak student, but in fact I was just different. So, yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question. It didn't really relate to the angst, but Okay.
Okay, and then finally I would give the question from over there to you. If I remember right, it was a question of labeling, but more the question if people don't agree, don't have a consent, and then they don't use a system that may be a risk for the future, and how can regulations deal with that?
This problem that we were talking about, it is generic. The same in most fields in the digital age. For example, you don't want your employer or a potential employer to have access to your Facebook account. But on the other hand, if you do not have a Facebook account, you will think, what's wrong with this guy? He doesn't have a Facebook, okay? So, but consent is only one bolt or one principle in the overall data protection regime. It's not only about consent. As I was saying earlier, it doesn't have to be on or off. Another principle can be access to data. So you can consent to the collection and to share your information and to share your personal data, but you should also be provided with or receive the right to access this data and to know exactly, it's the student or his parents, what has been collected so far. And you should have the ability to change this data. So for example, if in the 5th grade you used to absent a lot, okay, or you had, I don't know, certain problems because your parents got divorced or whatever, and eventually you don't get accepted to Harvard, okay, just because in the 5th grade, you should be able to know that this is one of the reasons, okay? And now, the solution is not consent. The solution in this regard should be access to data and ability to change data and ability to update data and ability to know what's been collected. And you know what, not even what's been collected, but what kind of profile has been built. You can have access to all this kind of data, but without understanding what's been built. So this is it.
Yeah, I think that was a good answer on the one hand, and on the other hand, it raises a lot of questions, but we don't have the time to ask all these questions. But one last question, okay?
Hello, my name is Shahid. I'm a business intelligence analyst and I'm an algorithm developer. I have worked in different segments of education, telecom, and e-commerce. My question is for both of you. One question. How are you managing the content creation cycle? That's a big question because at the end of the day, it's all about content distribution and how efficient and personalized it is to help in the learning curve of any student at any level. And it kind of includes another dynamic complexity, that is the level of learning. For example, some student in grade 8 has a different level of consuming the information, and somebody at grade 5 has a different conceptual understanding. So how are you managing that? And what is your feedback loop for the interaction of the student with the platform? So once the student interacts with the platform, how it's being feedback in the whole system that the other students can get benefit out of his interaction. And my question for you regarding data privacy is that if your concept of personalized data privacy is very nice, but if the company commits that all the information that we are going to collect from the users would only be used for educational content recommendation and kind of personalized learning and all of that, and it won't be used for any commercial ads or things like that, does it satisfy the overall data privacy paradigm issue that we are facing either in US or in Europe? So, yeah.
So maybe we have one last brief answer.
Very brief,
to that.
okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Shall I start?
Yeah, yes,
Okay,
sure.
so in terms of how is the data being fed back into the system, this is a very good question. And I think it's about going back to this kind of variety and the velocity and the volume. It's obviously the volume has been collected for many years and on different learning objectives by thousands and thousands of students. And then it informs the system how that content is being understood. There is always, if you go to the Learn Smart book, then there is always a point in where you can actually challenge the answers. So, and that's something that's also really important because the students may themselves have another perspective on the content. And then this feeds back into the product, and the author, because it's a publishing company, then the answers that are being fed back are then the understanding, not the actual specific data itself, but the understanding of how those students are interacting with the content is, you know, it creates a basis for the authors to then develop their content further, right? How the content creation cycle is working, how we're managing that. Yeah, difficult question. Maybe, yeah, just a quick clarification on that. Do you mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Yeah. Maybe just because we're running a little bit out of time, we can transfer this question to the third part of the evening and give you the possibility to answer.
So I'll divide my answer into two parts. I'll do it short, but I'll divide it into two parts. First of all, with all those stories about data leakage and about breach of security, data security, I'm not sure if you can trust. Now, even if they obligate that data will not be shared, I'll take this one, okay. But leave this aside. I think that the main point about my presentation and my talk earlier was that it's not all about flow of information. It's not all about whether a net company shares the information or whether it sells us advertisements. You know. It's also about other rights or other objectives that should be fulfilled, such as intellectual privacy. I think the concept of intellectual privacy, and I do recommend everyone to read Neil Richard's book about intellectual privacy. This is not about sharing data or about transferring data. This is about limiting or maybe adjusting how data is being collected. So, no, I will not be satisfied by an obligation or a commitment not to share data. This is only a start. Okay? In the US, this is what has been happening for the last 3 years or so. There was the pledge, the student privacy pledge, and many diverse state level and federal level legislation. Most of them did address the issue of flow of information, okay? About limiting the vendor's ability to share it with fourth parties, okay, with the other parties. But it's not all about this. And this is why the mounting debate about student privacy or student data use is still going on, even though there are many wide range legislation that already been enacted. California, for example, you have several laws that are pending. So it's not all about this, so I won't be satisfied.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we are now moving to the third part of the evening because there are many questions to discuss and to ask, and maybe you will talk to each other. I would like to thank you, Jessica White and Neha Kamel, for your interesting talks and for the discussion. And I would like to thank you for your questions and for your time. And finally, I would like to thank the Alexander von Humboldt Institute für Gesellschaft und Internet and the Vodafone Institute for Society and Communication for making it possible tonight and to give us the chance to move to the third part of the event and to discuss all these questions with a few drinks, I guess, over there. So just join us. Thank you. Thank you.